This is Chosen PLLC. Welcome to Clinician Conversations, where mental health professionals talk about how they cope with navigating life challenges.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Clinicians Conversations. We're back to talk more about boundaries, and we're going to go pretty much wherever that leads us today. But we'll kind of start where, what they are, or not necessarily what they are, but how they kind of show up in our lives. I'm going to do something new today. Why don't we just go around the room and say our names and our various letters behind them. I'm Benjamin Stibbs. I'm a licensed practicing counselor, and we'll send it to whoever else wants to say.
I'm Laurel Huff. I'm a licensed professional counselor.
I'm Jill Chastain, licensed professional counselor.
I'm Dr. Leatrice Brooks, licensed psychologist.
Awesome. Well, welcome everybody. I guess let's just start. Usually, when my clients are going, this is one of the things that they actually ask. Is if I ask them, "Well, you should make a boundary with them," and the next thing they'll say is, "Well, what does that look like? I don't know if I can do that." And we kind of have to go into their life situation and kind of tailor the boundary to what they're going through. Has that been
Mhm.
your experience that boundaries aren't just like the set thing, but they're very individualistic to the situations?
Mhm.
One of the things that comes up for me is, oftentimes we're not taught to have boundaries necessarily, particularly in certain kinds of relationships, right? So, one of the big ones that comes up sometimes is boundaries in relationships with parents.
Mm,
Yes,
And, people
that
feel
makes
like,
sense.
that is the hardest thing on earth to do because it's your parent.
Mhm.
Or sometimes it's boundaries with an employer, or boundaries in a relationship with a friend or a significant other, and what that looks like. Especially because generally speaking, people are kind and we want to. We want things to feel good, and boundaries typically don't feel good when you're asserting them. It feels good to have them honored and respected, but it does not necessarily feel good to have that conversation with someone. And so I
Mm.
think sometimes we might be good with boundaries in one area of our life. Um, but then when it comes to, certain kinds of
Mhm. Mhm.
relationships, we struggle
Mhm.
more.
mhm.
Absolutely.
A lot of
Absolutely.
times people kind of, I don't know, maybe feel like one of the things that I hear is, "I can't do that because that would be mean to set
Mhm.
that boundary with that person. What if they don't like me
Yes.
anymore?" Those kind
Yeah.
of things.
And
But
sometimes there's culture plays a big part in it too, where that hierarchy of the family, and that's the way you don't say no to mom and dad, or you are responsible for taking care of mom and dad. It's just, and it's hard to fight against that for fear of being ostracized by the family. Because sometimes there's consequences, and you have to be willing to accept the consequences and be okay with that. And sometimes it's hard to deal with that.
mm,
So
yeah.
it's almost like giving permission for those emotions and normalizing it first, maybe before we
Mm.
even get to possibly, attacking one area and looking at what somebody could do.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So with
One
bound
Mhm.
oh, go ahead.
one of the things that, the conversation I often have with people is, so two things, like what does what does it look like to not have the boundary? Right?
Mhm.
Which is the
Mhm.
reason we having this conversation to begin with, is
Yeah.
whatever it is that's currently happening is not working for you. That's why you brought it
Right.
up in therapy.
Right.
And so what would it look like to have your need met? And then also recognizing that in healthy relationships, people respect your boundaries.
Mm,
Mhm.
Because
Yeah.
for as much as you want them to be okay and you want the relationship to be okay, they should want you to be okay. They
Mhm.
should want the relationship to be okay. And
Mhm.
so even if they say initially, like, man, like, oh, it catches them off guard. In a healthy relationship, they'll dialogue with you about it, or they'll just make the adjustment.
Mm-hmm. Keyword healthy. Yeah, that healthy
Mm-hmm.
relationship. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And learning to be okay with because I know this was hard for me too, when you set a boundary and then the person is like, okay, yeah, we got it. We hear you, we're gonna do it. And then they don't. They forget to remember or whatever. And knowing that sometimes you gotta circle back around and say, remember, don't
That's the
forget to
worst part.
remember.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
sometimes people think if you said it one time, everybody's gonna be okay with it, but you have to keep enforcing it. And the more you hold to it, people will learn to respect it.
Hmm. You had to train the
Mm-hmm.
people in your
Mm-hmm.
life how to treat you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think even with that, when it comes to, which brings up a whole other something, but even when it comes to the reminding people of what your boundaries are, we have to have a boundary around the reminders. Because at some
Yes.
point,
Yes. Right.
there's too many reminders and you just not trying.
Exactly.
Hmm.
It's like I'm not
Like you're
telling you no more.
right. Like you're not putting forth effort. And maybe the fact that you can't remember is an indication to me that this is not a healthy relationship. So
Exactly.
Hmm.
I know for
Yep.
me, I got a handful of times of talking about it. And then now I'm starting to reevaluate things. Like
Yes.
now
So
we need a
true.
different kind of a conversation about the boundary. Let's talk about what's the challenge with meeting the boundaries. Let me try to get an understand, or respecting the boundaries. Let me get an understanding as to where you're at. Because maybe
Yeah.
you don't want to respect, because I have had that happen. I'm sure everybody has had that happen before, where you establish a boundary with someone, they say, okay, yes, absolutely. And you later find out they have no intention
Yep. No
of
intention.
respecting your boundary.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
And then what
Mm-hmm.
do you do with
Mm-hmm.
that? It's like at that point, oh, I don't care if I look mean now.
Yeah. And then
Because
they
I know you being rude and disrespectful.
yeah. And then they get mad because you're exercising your boundaries. So
That part, right? When you confront somebody about
Mhm.
continuing to not disrespect your boundary, and then they get mad at you for asking them to
Why are you
respect
being
it.
so mean to me? They say and
Exactly.
such.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm learning too, especially to do it right away, because I would kind of
Yes.
sit with it for a little bit, and then the
Mhm.
resentment would come up, which we know is
Mhm.
usually slow. And then it gets to a
Mhm.
point that it's like, okay, it's been how long? And I still need to address this.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yes. Choose guilt over resentment. I'm telling you,
Mhm.
Yeah.
the guilt will eventually go away. But the resentment, like you said, Laurel, it'll get in there and it'll stick.
Yeah. It
Mhm.
simmers and
Mhm.
festers and all
It
that
Mhm.
does.
stuff.
Because
Yeah.
resentment is really about wishing someone were doing something differently,
It is.
because what they're
It
currently doing is
is.
not working.
Mhm.
And
Hmm.
so
Mhm.
resentment, like you were saying, Laurel, is an indication that I have a boundary that's not, or I have a need that's not being met.
Mhm.
Mhm. Mhm.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah, and being in relationships where I hear this sometimes, where people are afraid to ruffle feathers, so to speak, and just keep it the same way. Everyone will like me and it'll be okay. And but then the other person is that's wanting the boundaries is suffering on the back end, but
Mhm.
afraid to confront certain individuals for fear of rejection.
Mhm.
Hmm.
And
Mhm.
that's a issue as well.
Mhm. So then my question becomes, right? So if I have a client that's like, well, I don't want to ruffle any feathers. I want people to like me. Okay, but your feathers ruffled. Is
Yeah,
that
thank you.
is
Right,
that
right,
okay? It's not like we're
right,
completely avoiding the ruffling of feathers.
right, exactly.
Yours are ruffled, which is why we're having this
Yeah,
conversation. And is
yep.
that worth anything? And to
Mm,
whom?
mhm, mhm.
Right? Because not establishing boundaries really says something about, right? And this is the therapeutic aspect of it, something about the value and the worth that we place on
Yeah,
ourselves.
yeah, there you
Hmm.
go. Yeah.
And that's where it can
Mhm.
get tricky because that's where the shame lies, I
Mhm.
feel, with most of my clients. And so, what is this going to look like where I'm holding you accountable? But I'm also understanding that at some point you felt that you had to choose between kind of connecting with people or being who you are.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's so true. That
Yeah.
Mhm.
is so true. Yeah.
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 Wow.
And I think, boundaries are something that we can't, for as much as you want to sometimes just say like, hey, here's the boundary, this is what we need to do. And we make the recommendation, but we can't force
Mhm.
people into the boundaries, right? Like we give you the
Mhm.
tools and then it's up to you to decide. But, on the
Mhm.
positive end, if a client continues to do the work with you, eventually they'll come back
You'll
around
get
to
it.
it, right?
That's
They're like, you
yeah.
know what? You were right. This is not working for me. And now they're ready to implement.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah, and learning that, why do I have to be uncomfortable so that other people can be comfortable? What that doesn't make any sense. But
Mhm.
when they start
Right.
thinking about it logically, and I have to ask that question myself sometimes. I have situations come up and it's like, why do I have to be uncomfortable? They're comfortable. What about me? What
They
about
kicking
me?
it,
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm all worked up,
right?
on the inside.
Yep. Very true.
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's on the inside, and I think we don't think about this part too. It's on
Mhm.
the inside when I'm with this person. It's also on the inside when I'm not with this person.
Yes, it's
Now
there.
you are consuming my life in a way that I need to be able to move and flow.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm,
Exactly. Exactly.
mhm,
Yeah. In
Well, I
ways that
found,
feel good.
yeah. Well, I've found that some folks that I've been worked with in the past are so used to the unhealthy relationship kind of standard that they think that's normal. And when
mm.
I'm asking them to make
Yeah,
a
yes.
boundary, it's like it's so alien to them that it feels
Yep.
wrong that they're
Yeah.
doing the boundary, and they actually are gravitating back towards the unhealthy relationships or the unhealthy boundaries because it's
Mhm,
normal. It's
Mhm.
mhm.
fine. It's their that place is their place of comfort
Comfort.
and security. So you're actually trying to ask them to give up basically their fuzzy blanket or their little stuffed
Mhm,
animal thing
mhm,
emotionally and go to
mhm.
this very scary place
It's
that's
mhm,
actually a healthy place.
Yeah.
mhm.
That's why I usually recommend starting small and
Yes.
and then maybe looking at an area, maybe with family, it seems more scary, but maybe with friends or with work, that's something that they might notice they could do that or they're already
Yep.
doing that. And then it's kind
Yeah.
of like, okay, noticing I can do this and I can sit with the discomfort. And
Yep.
yeah,
Yeah.
it grows from there.
It
Yeah.
does. And rehearse each victory.
Hmm.
But start small. I do that. I say that too. Start small.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not a huge
Mhm.
shock to the system and things like that.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
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 One
So
thing too is boundaries are all around, and I don't think we think about that necessarily. Like,
Mm.
it's a boundary at the store that you don't just walk in and take what you want and leave.
Mm. Mhm.
this is
That's a
true.
boundary that they have, right? At
Yes.
some places you can
Uh,
do that because everything free. Come on in, get what you want, and go. That's fine. But at Walmart, they have a boundary, and they
Mhm.
exactly.
got people to enforce the boundary.
Yes.
They will enforce the boundaries. That's
They
right.
will enforce the boundary, and we adhere to the boundary. And here's the thing: the people that we're establishing boundaries with, they know how to adhere to a boundary.
Yep.
Mhm.
They're just not doing it with us.
That's right. Yeah.
You know how
Yeah.
to do it
Yeah.
because you don't just go to work and do whatever it is that you want to. You following somebody's guidelines, instructions.
Exactly.
You
Exactly.
know how to do that, and you're
Mhm.
choosing not to adhere to mine.
Yeah.
And it has to be that's a problem for me because it's not going to
Mhm.
be a problem for you.
Mm-mm.
Mhm.
Yeah,
It has to be a
absolutely.
problem for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you
Yeah.
figure with all those other situations, there's an
Yes.
actual very real consequence to breaking those boundaries. So if they can get away with
Mhm.
it with you without
Mhm.
consequence, of course they'll break it. You're kind of
Right.
giving them permission to
Right.
do it.
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
That's right.
Mhm. Mhm.
Absolutely. That's
Yeah.
yeah. I like that. Uh-huh. Giving them permission.
Yeah.
to do it. That's in essence, that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Consequences can be a uh they can be a deterrent from
Mm.
doing certain things or engaging
Mhm.
in certain ways.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And then it's about what I talked about, like value. What value am I placing on myself?
Yes.
And does this person also see my value
Mhm.
enough to want to adhere to the boundary, right? I see the
Absolutely.
value in whatever it is that they're selling at Walmart. And so I adhere to the boundary of I need to pay for this before I walk out the store.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And I need you to do the same thing as it relates to whatever boundary that I have.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
'Cause-
and even with boundaries, when you first start setting them, it can be painful, like Benjamin, like you said, uncomfortable, but it's a good uncomfortable. It's a good pain. There's good pain and bad pain. That's a good pain because that'll heal. But if not, when we let things continue to go in an unhealthy way, it goes into suffering and could be harm. So we have to have them. You have to have them.
yeah.
That brings up for me what Laurel said about starting small. Because,
Mhm.
one of the things I say sometimes is that every time we step out, we usually say that I'm stepping outside of my comfort zone, right? But every time you step out of your comfort zone, you're actually expanding your comfort zone, right? So when you start
Good.
small, when it comes to boundaries, I'm
Mhm.
expanding it. And now that feels okay to me. So then I can step out and do another level of boundaries in a relationship, and that will feel okay. And so it gets to a place where I don't I don't know that there comes a place unless you just, completely angry and disgusted where you just shutting down everything and like you have no feelings about boundaries at all. Usually you're probably going to feel something, but that something is only going to last for a short period of time because you're going to more quickly move into the conversation with yourself that this is a healthy thing and
Yeah.
this is
Mhm.
productive, and that discomfort dissipates over time. And so sometimes we don't give ourselves enough opportunity to allow the discomfort to dissipate. We
Mhm.
know that
That's good.
it will go away, right? It's
That's
kind of like
good.
exposure therapy. Exposure
Yes.
therapy is
Yes.
you throw me out there and I'm going to let my anxiety reach its peak, and then I'm going to learn that it will come back
It'll
down. I
come
didn't blow
down.
up. I didn't, pass out on sight. Like
That's right.
it will de-escalate. And so a
Mhm.
lot of times what we do instead of establishing a boundary is we escape. So
Mhm.
I allow the discomfort to build and then I'm out of here. As soon as you look at me sideways, I'm like, that's okay. Don't worry about it. Like that's, it, and you just continue retreat. And so
Yeah.
we don't
You
want to
do.
do that.
Exactly.
And part
Exactly.
of therapy is preparing for that. This is what it's probably going to be like. I know sometimes I talk to the people about boundaries and they're like, my heart is racing just talking about setting the
Yeah.
boundary.
Well.
Great. Let's practice it. Let's
Yeah.
Exactly.
push through that now.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And help them to
Mhm.
understand that it will dissipate at some point. It's not a
It
permanent
will.
condition, but
Okay.
constantly giving in to the people that are messing with you, that is a permanent condition that can
Mhm.
just, especially if you just don't do anything, no one out, they're not going to stop. I
No.
mean, so
Mm-mm.
yeah.
Mm-mm.
I like
Yeah.
that idea of the stepping out, but out and that idea of you're claiming the territory every time you step out and the circle
Yeah.
gets bigger and you get a bigger and bigger territory to kind of
Mhm.
work with and exist in.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I like that. I'm gonna beg, borrow, and steal that from you.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Because
Yeah.
there's something, even in thinking about the way that you're describing it, there's something about that also increases your confidence and your self-esteem
It does. Yeah.
Mhm.
because you feel like you're able to move about the world in a more comfortable way across a broader spectrum.
Mhm.
And it feels good. It
Hmm.
feels
Yeah,
good.
that
Yeah.
Yeah.
standing and
The word
conquering
Mhm.
empowerment,
language.
yeah,
Yeah.
empowering
Mhm.
comes to
Mm.
mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love that.
Hmm.
Mhm.
So if you had to name, oh, go ahead, Laurel.
I was just gonna say, I was thinking of like the visualization, because that's what I will do too. If the heart is racing, when I'm talking to a client, just bringing it up in therapy with, manifesting and visualizing, or even drawing it out kind of, usually it tends to be like a bubble thing, but just kind of having that empowerment that they're kind of owning, and hoping that they can still remember when they actually have that conversation with a loved one or whoever. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep. I think it also gives you an opportunity to normalize what it's probably going to feel like.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Rehearsing it.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
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 Rehearsing it. And with the anxiety, the body is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It's trying to protect us.
Mhm.
But we have to let it know that it's a false alarm. And that's why that exposure therapy, sometimes the healing is in the doing. A lot of times you have to step out there and do it because it's bigger in our head. And then when we run from it, then the body is like, okay, yep, mission accomplished. Did what we were supposed to do. But no, you have to go through it, and then once you go through it, it's like it wasn't that bad. It's okay. I made it. I
Yeah.
made it this time, and then you can the next time and the next time.
Yeah. And being okay with practicing it and being
Yeah,
okay with not being perfect at it when you first starting, because
yeah, yeah.
if you've done your whole life not doing boundaries, you're gonna kind of suck at it as you're
It's going
trying
to
to
take some
try it out.
time.
Yeah, and
Hmm.
being okay that's okay. It doesn't mean you stop trying. You
Yeah.
Mhm.
keep practicing and you keep getting
Hmm.
better and those
Yeah.
kinds
Yep.
of things.
If it's like a muscle that you have not used or haven't
Yeah.
used much, that makes sense.
An
Hmm.
atrophied muscle, if
Mhm.
you will. So yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
Well,
Yeah,
any
absolutely.
final thoughts? Our time is getting close to running out. So any final thoughts from everyone?
I just want to say, in boundaries, and I'm doing this in my life as well, is choosing you and learning to trust yourself and lean into the lean into those boundaries no matter how hard they are if you want something to change, and choose guilt over resentment is really what I want to end with. The choose the guilt over resentment. You may feel guilty at first, but that will lessen, so that you don't feel resentment, against, to yourself and to other people. And I felt that before, and that's not a good place either. And so choose guilt over resentment, and choose your boundaries. Choose you.
Hmm. Agreed. Well, and I
You're,
I think it's just such an important thing because everybody that we're dealing with, they may not believe it, but they are of value and they're a precious person, and got to teach them that the boundaries aren't trying to be mean to anybody. It's to protect that value, that person, and people that are in relationship with them. They have to also respect that value and understand that they're not dealing with somebody that can be used up or that's not of any consequence. So to be able to instruct
mhm.
them in a way that they can defend themselves and really instill that value in them is just
Mhm.
so important. And what's one of the
Yes.
that's one of the tools we use is this setting of boundaries.
Yeah. And just one last comment too. There's a proverb that says a city not having boundaries is like a city with no walls. That means anyone can come in and do anything. So we need
Hmm.
we need boundaries.
That's excellent. I think that's an excellent place to end on.
So I want
Well,
I want to say one thing that builds
okay,
off of what Jill just said
okay.
is remembering that boundaries honor your needs
Mm,
and that
yes.
your needs
Yeah.
are worth being met.
Hmm.
I
Yes.
love that.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I love
Yes.
that too.
Yes.
Yes.
And just to
Absolutely.
add to that, make it your own, because there's
Yes.
definitely a template, but just because one person does it one way, part of the
Mm,
self-care is figuring out your needs and what works for you.
yes, absolutely. I love it.
Agreed. Agreed.
Mhm. Mhm.
Well, thank you everyone for sitting down, taking some time to discuss this. Hopefully, everybody enjoyed the podcast today. If you have suggestions for topics for us to talk about, write it in the comments section. We would love to hear your thoughts and ideas, and would love to we like to discuss stuff with each other. So feel free to put that in the comments, and we'll look at them and see whether or not we want to chat about them, or maybe modify them in some way. But we will
Mhm.
see you at the next episode of Clinicians Conversations. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Say
All
say
right.
bye,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye. Bye.